Good morning. In this video, I'm going to talk about monopolistic competition, and I'm going to follow sections 1 and 2 in chapter 11 in the textbook. So far we talked about two extreme cases. We talked about the competitive industry and the monopoly, and they're different in pretty much every assumption of the model. So in the competitive industry, there will be a large number of firms produce an identical product, and firms will have zero market power. That means they will have to follow the market price. We call it price-taking firms, and there's going to be free entry and exit into the industry. Under the monopoly conditions, there is a single firm in the market that does not have any competitors, and it does not even have other firms in other industries and markets produce close substitutes for the firm's output. So the firm has complete market power, it is free to set its own price, and because there are barriers to entry into that firm's industry, even potential competitors find it hard to create competition to the monopoly. So under monopoly, a single firm has all the market power in the world. Under a competitive industry, there are so many firms that no firm has any market power at all. And so what we're going to look at today is in a non-trivial blend of some characteristics of monopoly and some characteristics of competitive industry, which is called monopolistic competition. What are the assumptions in the monopolistic competition model? First of all, there's still going to be a large number of firms, so just like in a competitive industry, but the difference is that the firms will be producing differentiated products. So remember here, identical product means that consumers in a competitive industry don't care who to buy from. They only care about the price, and they will be willing to buy the lowest price possible. So firms will be competing with each other by undercutting each other. And this is how the market price will prevail. Under monopolistic competition, the product that one firm produces doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the product that the other firm produces, and so there will be slight differences, and because of these slight differences, firms will not be forced to set one the same price, and in fact will let firms set their own prices. So in that respect, monopolistic competition will be more like monopoly. But in the end, we're still going to allow free entry and exit into the industry, so it's going to be very much like perfect competition. And these, the first and the last points, is what make it look like the competitive industry. Large number of firms, free entry and exit, but the crucial difference is each firm is going to be producing something slightly different from their competitors. And because of that, they'll be facing a downward sloping rather than a flat, perfectly elastic demand curve. And with a downward sloping curve, they will act like monopolies in the sense that they'll be able to set their own prices. So what does that translate into? In the short run, firms will act like monopolies. They will see downward slope in demand for their output. They will pick a point in that demand that will maximize their profit. But in the long run, there's not going to be any profit at all because, as usual, if we let free entry into the industry, as long as there are positive profits in the short run, new firms will enter and kill that profit. And we're going to see how exactly it's going to happen in a monopolistic competition. If you care about real-world examples, think about Lyft or Uber as an example of a competitive industry where when you need to get a ride, you don't really care who you're getting a ride from as long as they're well rated. So everybody, every driver offers you the same product, a ride from point A to point B. In monopolistic competition, an example of it would be Airbnb. If you were to travel, well, in normal times, of course, if you were to travel to a different city and you wanted to rent a room or an apartment to stay, all rooms and all apartments are slightly different. They differ in terms of the amenities that the owners provide or in terms of locations. And so one room and another room, or one apartment and another apartment, wouldn't be perfect substitutes to each other. And so you would really care about one apartment more than the other. And so the Airbnb industry, in a sense, is a monopolistic competition. owners are offering differentiated rooms and apartments for rent. But the entry and exit in both industries is free in a sense. Like in the Uber market, if you have a car, that's pretty much it. You don't need to pay a lot more to enter to become an Uber driver. If you own, or even if you're renting an apartment, you can easily turn it into an Airbnb. So in the long run, in these industries, producers, that means drivers and renters, earn zero economic profits because the competition kills all the positive profits. So let's see how that happens. Let's look at a firm in a monopolistically competitive market, and let's start with the short run. And I'm going to give you a very simple example, and this example just follows the pattern of a monopoly example where you're faced with a price quantity table. So there's going to be a demand curve, and you know what the firm's total costs are, and given the demand and total costs, you need to determine what the optimal output for the firm is. And the steps that you need to take to do so are the same steps as in the monopoly case in the previous video. So it's also going to be a reminder of how a monopoly operates. So step one, we need to find the total revenue by multiplying price and quantity for every output level. So 0 times 120 will give you total revenue of 0. 1 times 100 will give you total revenue at 1, and so on. I'm not going to spend much time on it. You can pause the video right now and practice yourself, but I'm going to give you the answer. This is the total revenue, just multiplying quantity and price for every column. Step two, given total revenue, you need to find marginal revenue by subtracting two neighboring total revenues from each other. So total revenue of 1 minus total revenue of 0 will give you a marginal revenue of 100. The second unit that you produce will give you a marginal revenue of 60. The third unit will be 20, and then you'll go into negatives. So marginal revenue is just the difference between two neighboring total revenues for every level of output. So we've identified the marginal revenue. Similarly, compute marginal cost by finding the difference in total costs. And as usual, marginal costs are increasing. And once we've computed marginal revenue and marginal cost, we can find the output that the firm is going to produce by using the optimal condition. Produce output as long as marginal revenue exceeds or is equal to marginal cost. And in our case, the first unit should be produced because its marginal revenue is 100 and marginal cost is 4. So you're going to be earning $96 on the first unit. The second unit and the third unit should also be produced because the marginal revenue in both cases is at least as high as the marginal cost. So after you've produced the third, you should stop because the fourth unit will give you a negative marginal revenue and a positive marginal cost. So you'll be losing money on the fourth unit. So the optimal amount to produce is 3. And if you produce 3, you can also calculate the profit by saying, well, at 3 units, you can sell them at the market price of 60, earning a total revenue of $180. But in terms of total costs, 3 units only cost you 136. So the profit is going to be the difference between the total revenue at 3, 180, and total cost at 3, 136, and the difference is 44. So the profit will be $44. And we can also illustrate this optimal firm's decision on the graph. So on this graph, the demand curve is blue, the marginal revenue curve is below the demand, and since demand is a straight line, the marginal revenue is also a straight line. And then you have the orange marginal costs and the green average costs. And I haven't calculated average costs, but just trust me that this is how they look like, and I'm going to use them on the graph to show the profits. And so graphically, here's how a firm in a in a monopolistically competitive market decides how much to produce. Look at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost. In this case, it happens exactly at 3. So the optimal output is 3. Now, given output 3, look at the demand curve and identify the price at which the company is able to sell its output, that price is going to be 60. And if we compare the price level of 60 with the average cost, the green line at Q equals to 3, we can see that price is above average cost. And so the profit is positive because for every unit that you sell, you earn more on average than it costs you on average. So there is this profit per unit that's going to be positive, multiplied by the number of units will give you the profit of 44. So this is the graphical illustration of a monopolistically competitive firm in the short run. How do we transition from the short run into the long run? Well, the thing to notice is that because profits are positive, new firms will enter the market, and these other firms will take some customers away from the existing firms. So the demand for this particular firm will go down. And so what's going to happen as we transition into the long run is that the marginal cost and the average cost, the yellow and the green lines will stay the same, but the blue and the red lines will shift down. More firms will mean reduced demand for the current firm, and ultimately, in the long run, the difference between the price and the average cost at the optimal point will shrink to 0. So let me show you how that happens. Here, we're going to look at the long run example. So this is going to be the long run demand, and you can see that the reduction in demand in our table simply means that the price that consumers are willing to pay is smaller for every quantity. So think of a reduction in demand is a reduction in willingness to pay. And if we want to find the optimal output for this firm in the long run, well, we have to follow pretty much the same steps, except for we already calculated the marginal cost. So we just need to calculate new total revenue by, again, doing the multiplication of quantity and price. So here's the new total revenue. And then we need to find the new marginal revenue by finding the difference between two nearby total revenues. So you can see that, well, total revenue is smaller, marginal revenue is smaller, so the demand is not looking as great. But once we've done that, we need to compare the new marginal revenue and new marginal cost. And if we do so, we can see that although the first unit is profitable, 98 versus 4, the second unit is profitable, it's 18 versus 12, but the third unit isn't profitable anymore because you lose $32 in revenue, and on top of that, you pay $20 in costs. So you should stop at 2. Optimal output in the long run is just 2. And at that optimal output, your total revenue is 116 because you can offer the price of 58. 2 times 58 is 116. That's the total revenue side. Your total costs are also 116, and your profit is exactly 0. So the firms are still maximizing profits in the long run by selecting the output level at which marginal revenue equals or is greater than the marginal cost. But the profit at that profit maximizing level of output is still 0. So they're doing their best, but they're still earning 0 economic profits. And so in this scenario, price equals average cost. So even though I haven't shown you the calculation for the average cost, now you see that at the profit maximizing level of output of 2 in the long run, price equals 58 and average cost equals exactly 58. So let's see graphically what's going on. Before I show you the graph for the long run, recall the graph for the short run. In the short run, optimum is 3 units. At 3 units, price is above average costs. And now I'm gonna transition into the long run by shifting the blue line and by shifting the red line. So let's see. There we go. So in the long run, demand is significantly lower and the marginal revenue is significantly lower, but costs stay the same. And so what happens here, marginal revenue and marginal costs intersect slightly over 2. So 2 is the optimal output, just as we've computed. At 2, price is 58, average costs are 58, so profit is 0. So remember, if we went a little back, we had this rectangle illustrating the profit, and as we transition into the long run, the blue line, the demand shifts so much that that rectangle just shrinks into a line. And so there are no profits at all. But that's not just the whole story. One thing that I want you to observe is that average cost and demand are tangent at q equal to 2. And so, in fact, this is the only point for the monopolistically competitive firm where they won't be making negative profits. Everywhere else, the price that they're willing to get, say at 3, it's under 30, but costs will be over 40, so they'll be losing money. At 4, they'll be losing money, and at 1, they'll be losing money at all. So this is the only point for a monopolistically competitive firm to make actually 0 profits. But that's not the only strange observation about this graph. At this point, where the firm is producing, price is still above marginal cost. The marginal cost of the second unit is only 12, but the price is 58. And recall when we talked about the monopoly, price being higher than the marginal cost is an indication of inefficiency. The third unit, the market will value more than it will cost to produce, but the firm will not be willing to produce the third unit because it will lose money overall by increasing its output from 2 to 3. So just like in the monopoly case, in the monopolistically competitive industry, there is deadweight loss because firms cut production too short relative to the efficient output. But that's not the whole story too. They're producing at a cost of 58, which is not the smallest average cost possible. And if the same firm with the same long run total cost operated in a perfect competition rather than in a monopolistic competition, it would be forced to produce more efficiently at the minimum average cost. So compared to a perfect competition, a monopolistically competitive firm produces way less. A perfectly competitive firm would produce 5 at the price equal to 40. A monopolistically competitive firm produces 2 at the price of 58. So it produces way less and it charges a way higher price. And by restricting output and charging higher price, it creates deadweight loss. So to sum things up, a firm under monopolistic competition basically takes the worst of the two worlds. From perfect competition, the worst thing that can happen is earning 0 profits in the long run. So firm is doing its best, but it's earning 0. The worst part of a monopoly industry is that it creates deadweight loss by reducing output, producing too little, and charging too much. So a firm under monopolistic competition generates deadweight loss by producing too little at too higher price, and it's still earning 0 profits, just like a perfectly competitive firm would do. So in a sense, that's not great, but the explanation for it, the reason it can do so, is that in the long run, it still faces a downward sloping demand curve. It's still offering something that's slightly different than what firms under perfect competition would offer. And differentiated products allow it to restrict output, but they don't generate a lot of gains for the firm in the long run. Thank you.